Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about one of the most fundamental aspects of any programming language, and that is the use of collections. Collections such as arrays or sets or dictionaries, they help us put objects of the same nature or different type into a container. Now, why would we need to do that? We would need to put objects of the same type in an array so that we can have an order between them. Imagine you want to have the days of the week stored somewhere, as opposed to saying one string for Monday, another string for Tuesday, another string for Wednesday, so on and so forth. I could put all of them into one object only and then go through that and find the ones that I need. So let's jump into Xcode and let's get started so we get a better understanding of how it works. I'm going to go to Xcode. In here, I'm going to start a new project. Let me close that one first. I'm going to start a new project. Mac OS command line tool is called Arrays and Sets tool. Let's call it. Doesn't matter what we call it exactly. So let's go ahead and start our very first array. As always, I'm going to clear this up. I'm going to get myself a better formatting. So the first thing I want to do is I want to declare an array. I'm going to say ns array, and it is called days array, and that is declaring an array. Now the next thing I have to do is, and this is quite important, I have to both allocate and initialize an array. And this is a topic we haven't really seen much in the past, and we will talk about it much more details in the future. So the next thing is allocation and initialization, which is done like this. Days array is ns array allocate and initialize with some objects. What are those objects? What are the objects that I want to put in my array? Well, one of them is Monday. The other one is Tuesday. The next one is Wednesday. And let's say I only need it for 4 days of the week. And whenever you put a nil, that means this is the end of array, simply because arrays don't have a limit. You can put as many objects as you want into them. And when we are initializing them, we need a way of saying, well, this is the end of the array. So let me put that there. And a very common practice is stacking your objects like this. So I'm going to say that. So that kind of, you can see all of them together. Now let's see what we have done. We have declared an array and we have allocated and initialized it, alloc and initialized with these objects. That's essentially like doing the definition of it. So we had the declaration and we have the definition. And now we have an array with ordered objects. Let's see what's that order. So the very first object, it is at what we call index 0. Then the next object is at index 1. And you can imagine as we go along, this will become index 2, this will become index 3, so on and so forth. So we will have so many objects in our array and they're all ordered, which is quite an important aspect of an array, being ordered. So how do we get access to these objects? Let's go ahead and say, I want to print the element that is at index 2. So I'm going to say, nslog print whatever you find, or let's say object at index 2 is, just like what we had done before. And in here I'm going to say days array object at index 2, for instance. So this line will now print the object at index 2 is a space, and then it will look for any object that it finds in here. So in here, we're going to run this array. We're going to say days array, find object at index 2. Let's run it and see what we get. If we get Wednesday, it means everything we have done has worked properly. And it's like this. Object at index 2 is Wednesday. Now, the next question is, how would I know how many objects are in my array? I could do something like this. I could say nslog, and in my nslog, I'm going to say there are, and then I, because it's an integer, objects in my array. And obviously now the nslog is expecting us to feed it some sort of an integer value. And that integer value is daysArray.count. So that's essentially going to return the count of the array for us. We do get a warning in here. And that's primarily because days.count is not of the type integer. Let's have a look at it. Count, it is actually an NS unsigned integer. So to properly format that, I could actually say LU. So instead of printing integer, go and print LU for us. If you don't remember this, you can obviously refer to that Apple document that we had a few lessons ago. And also you could actually rely on Xcode to fix it for you. So in this case, I would just go to this warning and it says, well, it's an unsigned long, so fix it. And it says, well, you have to make it LU. And that's pretty much does the work for us. Now I'm going to go ahead and fix it manually again because I don't want to force it over there. And let's print this. Let's see what we get. And now it says object.index2 is still obviously Wednesday. It hasn't changed. There are 4 objects in my array. 0, 1, 2, 3. Those are the indexes. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the numbers of them. Now the next question that happens is, what if I wanted to add Friday here? Is there a way for me to add another day to the days array? And as you can imagine, the answer is no, simply because we are using an NS array. And if you remember from our NS string lesson, if you want to be able to modify your values, they have to become mutable. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go in here and say instead of an NS array, it is an NS mutable array. Obviously, if it is an NS mutable array, at my initialization, it has to become an NS mutable array as well. And now I have a days array, which is NS mutable array, and it has Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I'm printing the count of it. And then I'm saying days array, add object, and I'm going to add Friday. And what the add object does, it goes to the end of the array and adds one more object to it. And if we print the count of it now, I'm going to print it here one more time. We will see that at the beginning, there are 4 objects in my array. That is here. When we add the Friday, I can see that there are 5 objects in my array. Now, where we printed the Wednesday, this is using the object.index method. And I want to quickly talk about the use of these methods and the dot, operation and everything in here. Even though we will have a lesson for methods and functions, it kind of helps us understand why we are doing some of the things that we are doing. So things such as an array or NS mutable array, they have a built-in method called object.index. It means you use a square bracket, the name of your object, the name of your array, and then you say object.index and you feed it the index that you want and it gets back to you. So what is this one? Why are we using a dot operation? We will see this in more details when we talk about classes and objects, but some methods such as count, they can be used both ways. They can be used daysArray.count, or they can be used as this, daysArray.count. That is essentially called a dot operation. This is called a method calling. In here, I'm calling a method called count, which returns the count of an array. In here, I'm using a dot operation, which accesses the property count of the array. They both do exactly the same thing, and we get the same result. Not exactly the same result, but we get the same return, essentially. There is also a much easier way for getting the different elements from the array. So let's say I want to print the object that is at the end of my array. So I'm going to go ahead and say nslog. And in the nslog, I'm going to say last object is, and it's going to be something. What is that thing? That thing is going to be days array object.index. I'm going to write count. Now, not that. Sorry again, let me get my space. Days array dot count. Now, here is the thing. If you can imagine this, how it would work, you should expect this application to crash now. And I will show you why. I'm going to run the application and it's going to crash. And the crash report says index 5 beyond bounds 0 to 4. So it's saying you're trying to access an element that doesn't exist. But how is that possible? I'm looking at the count. The thing is, currently we have 0, 1, 2, and 3 indexes. So the last index that we can use is 3, even though our count is 4. After we have added Friday, this is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the indexes are 0 to 4 while the count is 5. Essentially in here, I'm saying days array object at index 5, which simply doesn't exist. It's saying you only have indexes 0 to 4. So if I want to find the last object, I can say count -1, and that's always the last object of an array. And now it says last object is Friday. There is also an easier way for writing this. So I'm going to rewrite it again. And this is called using a subscript. In a subscript, we do this. We say days array, and then we open brackets and we say 4. So it will print the element number 4 for us. Of course, this is a little bit different than this one, because in this one we are doing it statically. We are always looking at number 4, but here we are doing it dynamically and we are looking at the count -1, which happens to be 4 in this example, but not always. So if I wanted, I could actually grab this and put it there. And if you want to be very specific and do a much better, practice, you could actually do something like this. You could say int last index is days array dot count -1. So that is the last index, and this is the one that I want to see, days array last index. So let's print that out. So we got Friday again, and again we got the same warning saying that this guy is actually an unsigned long while this guy is going to be an integer, and you can let Xcode fix it for you, or if you want you can force fix it yourself. To force it ourselves, the thing you have to do is you have to come to your count and you have to say I'm gonna cast it into an integer. Again, don't worry about this exactly. We will talk more about casting in the future, but casting essentially means taking one type of variable and forcing it into another one. So because days array.count wasn't the type that we expected, I said take it and convert it into an integer and put it into my integer. Of course, casting is a little bit of a risky process because you have to be sure the objects, they can be converted to each other. For instance, I know an unsigned integer can simply be, an unsigned long can be converted to an integer, but that's not the case between, let's say, an integer and a string. So once the time comes, we'll talk more about casting and how we have to be certain about what we are trying to convert. So the next thing we want to talk about are sets, and what's the difference between a set and an array. Let's jump into Apple's own documentation, and in here there is a picture that explains that. Forget the picture in the middle, but NS array is an ordered set of objects that is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E, and an NS set is an unordered set of objects, A, D, Z, G, B, C. Something to keep in mind is that because NS sets are not ordered, you cannot have the same object happen twice. So all objects must be unique, but in an array, they don't have to be unique. Now, let's go back to Xcode. Let's quickly try that. So in here, I could actually have 2 copies of Wednesday, and it would be perfectly fine. You might have a situation that your app is dealing with certain number of users, and the same user happens to be twice there. Maybe your same user has commented twice, and that's why there is 2 copies of it there. So in an array, that's perfectly fine because they're ordered, and this Wednesday would be at index 2, while this one would be at index 3. However, when you deal with sets, and this is how we do a set, NS set, my set is NS set alloc, and init with objects, and the objects I'm gonna say Sunday and only say Monday for now. There's only 2 of them, and in a set they actually have to be unique, simply because there is no order between them. And now, why isn't there an order between them? Because when there is no order, the search between them, which is hashing between them, happens a lot faster. So in principle, if you have an array, or if you have a collection of objects that the order between them doesn't matter, you can rely on sets. If the order between them does matter, you have to use arrays. For the most part, we end up using arrays simply because the order matters to us. From time to time, we end up using things such as set, which the order doesn't matter and the objects are unique. Now you might be wondering, so if there is no order, how can I access different objects from the set? I cannot do things such as my set object at index something, because that order doesn't exist. And that is true, and I'm going to show you something that is coming up in a few lessons, so don't worry overly if you don't completely follow me. But here is how we do search within the set to find something. So in a set, we say for ns string any in my set, and then I'm gonna say if any is equal to a string, and let's say I'm looking for Friday. I'm trying to find out if an object as unique as Friday exists, and I'm gonna say nslog there is Friday, or something to that effect. Now don't worry about this format in particular. This is a for loop, which is a method of control flow, and we'll talk about it in a few lessons. In fact, in this I'm gonna say find all objects of the type ns_string within this array, within this set, sorry, my set, go through them one at a time, this one and that one and whatever is there. If any of them is equal to the value Friday, then tell me that there is Friday, or do something with that Friday, so on and so forth. We will see a lot more of this when we talk about the for loops and control flows in a few lessons. But for now, just keep in mind that if there are sets, it means the objects are unique, and also it means there is no order between them. So finally, before I close this lesson, there is 2 more things that I should talk about. One of them is objects in an array don't have to necessarily be of the same nature, even though we usually try to do that. But you could have an array such as this, ns array, my combined array, and that is going to be an ns array alloc and init with object, and one of my objects is a string, and then I have another object. Let me put all the brackets so I know there are no errors coming up. And then I have another object, and this object is going to be ns number with integer, say 8. Don't worry about what an ns number is. What does matter is that this is now a string. This one is not a string, it's a different type of number, different type of value, and that's perfectly fine. You can have it in an array, and sometimes it happens when we are reading values from networks or whatnot. But whenever we are doing things on our own, we try to maintain same type of value within an array. Finally, there is another way of writing arrays, which is essentially C way, an older way of writing arrays that doesn't offer us a lot of things that we could do with ns arrays or ns mutable arrays or ns sets, but from time to time it's useful. And here is how we do it. We say int my int, just like how we have been defining and declaring integers, but then we put 2 brackets in front of it, and we say, for instance, 5. It means I want to have an array of integers with 5 elements. You have to decide about the number of items in it right away, right at the declaration time. I'm going to say that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I have an array now with 5 elements in it. Those are integers, and the integers are these guys. Obviously, in a situation like this, I can't change one of them to be a string. I can't have something like this, because then it's going to give me an error saying Well, you said everything in here is going to be an integer. How come you're trying to force a string into it? So that's something to keep in mind. And also that you have to declare and define the number of objects in the array right at the very beginning, which kind of limits what you're trying to do, but that sometimes it might actually be useful. So with that, I think we're good. We talked about arrays, we talked about mutable arrays, we talked about how to get objects at indexes, we talked about subscript mode to get access to objects, we talked about getting the count of an array, we talked about adding objects into an array. Something we probably didn't talk about is removing an object, and that's actually quite simple. You can say days array remove object. You can either say remove this specific object, say remove object Friday, which is going to remove all instances of that, or you could say days array remove object at index. If you know where you want to remove, I want to remove the object that is in the first ID 0, index 0. So that's another thing. And finally, we talked about casting some stuff. We made a set. We talked about how for finding objects in a set, you have to iterate through them using a for loop or a similar loop. And at the end, we spoke about having arrays with different types of variables or values inside them, and a C way of making array, which is an older way. With that in mind, let's move on to our next lesson.